The congressional hearing room that morning was already suffocating with tension. Rows of journalists lined the back, their cameras ready, microphones pointed toward the long mahogany table where some of Washington's most polarizing figures were about to square off. It wasn't just another session, it was a televised oversight hearing that promised political sparks, and everyone in the room knew it the second Matt Gaetz and Jasmine Crockett sat across from each other. Gaetz lounged in his seat like a man preparing for sport. His confidence wasn't quiet up, it radiated, cocky and sharp. He flipped through a few pages of notes but didn't read a single word. He didn't have to. He was there for the moment, for the cameras, for the soundbite that would trend by noon. Across the aisle, Jasmine Crockett adjusted her glasses, her expression unreadable but her posture straight and alert. She wasn't one for theatrics, but she knew who she was dealing with. Gaetz didn't just come to argue, he came to dominate. The chairman called the meeting to order, his gavel striking wood. "This committee will come to order," he said sternly. The murmurs died instantly. "Today, we continue our discussion on government accountability, transparency, and campaign funding practices." That last phase was Gaetz's cue. He sat up, cleared his throat dramatically, and pressed his microphone button. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," he began, his southern drawl heavy and deliberate. "I just have one simple question for my colleague across the aisle, Representative Crockett." Jasmine's eyes met his, calm and steady. "Go ahead," she said, already sensing the setup. Gaetz smiled a tight, smug grin that had become his trademark. "Representative Crockett, you've made a lot of noise about campaign ethics and integrity," he said, "but according to the records, your campaign accepted donations from an organization under investigation for misappropriation of funds. Care to explain that hypocrisy?" A wave of murmurs rolled through the room. Journalists scribbled. Phones began recording. Gaetz leaned back, satisfied. Jasmine didn't blink. "Are you suggesting that I'm personally involved in anything unethical?" she asked, voice low but clear. "I'm just asking questions," Gaetz said, feigning innocence, spreading his hands as if to say, "What's the harm in transparency? After all, isn't that what you constantly demand of others?" A few of Gaetz's allies snickered. He glanced their way, proud. He expected Jasmine to stutter or deflect. Instead, she smiled a small, knowing smile that made Gaetz's stomach tighten. "Transparency," she repeated softly. "Good. Let's talk about that." She adjusted her mic. "Congressman, before you start waving around accusations, maybe you should remember that the Federal Election Commission already cleared that organization months ago. Their records are public. I'm surprised you didn't read them before trying to score points." Gaetz's smirk flickered. He hadn't expected her to be that prepared. "Well," he said, voice rising slightly, "it still raises questions. Only for people who don't do their homework." She shot back. That got a few audible gasps. The tension ratcheted higher. Gaetz leaned forward. "You don't get to lecture me about homework, Representative. You've been in office for barely 2 years." Jasmine's eyes narrowed. 2 years is long enough to recognize when someone's substituting facts for performance. Gaetz's jaw tightened. "I'm reclaiming my time," he snapped. "Oh, I know you'd love to reclaim it," she said calmly, "especially the time you've wasted turning congressional hearings into a stage show." A low ripple of laughter swept through the back of the room. Gaetz's face flushed red. "Mr. Chairman," he barked, "is this appropriate behavior for a committee member?" Before the chairman could respond, Jasmine raised a hand. "Actually, let me finish. Because this is exactly the problem, and the American people deserve to hear it." The chairman hesitated. "Representative Crockett, you have 30 seconds. That was all she needed. She leaned forward, every word deliberate, measured, and devastating. "What's inappropriate, Congressman Gaetz, isn't me calling out performative politics. It's the way some people here think public service is a competition for attention. You came here to make noise, not progress. You talk about transparency, but you hide behind sound bites. You demand accountability from others but dodge every serious question about your own record." The room went silent. Gaetz opened his mouth, but Jasmine didn't give him the chance. Her voice grew sharper, fueled by controlled fury. "You can interrupt me all you want. You can try to shout me down, but understand this. When you interrupt a woman trying to speak truth, It doesn't make you powerful. It makes you afraid. Afraid that someone might finally say what needs to be said and say it better than you ever could. Gasps filled the room again. Even the chairman froze, his gavel halfway in the air. Jasmine continued, her voice steady as steel. I didn't come here to play politics. I came here to serve people who can't afford for us to waste their time with ego battles. So the next time you try to cut me off, remember, you don't intimidate me. You only remind everyone watching why leadership and arrogance aren't the same thing. Her last sentence landed like a hammer. Reporters in the back started typing furiously. Cameras zoomed in, and staffers on both sides exchanged nervous glances. Gaetz's mouth opened and closed twice, searching for a comeback that didn't sound weak. Well, he stammered. But Jasmine leaned back in her chair, folded her arms, and said, I'm done. You can have your time now, Congressman, though I'm not sure you'll know what to do with it. That line hit harder than a gavel. Even the chairman couldn't hide a faint smile. Gaetz's aide, sitting behind him, mouthed silently, don't say anything. But Gaetz couldn't help himself. He straightened his tie and muttered into the mic, I think you've mistaken passion for professionalism, Representative. Without missing a beat, Jasmine replied, no, Congressman, I've just learned to be both. Laughter erupted from the audience. The chairman rapped his gavel. Order, please. Order. But order had already been lost. Gaetz slumped back in his chair, glaring at his notes like they had betrayed him. Jasmine calmly took a sip of water, her composure unshaken, her expression the picture of quiet triumph. Every camera in the room focused on her. That was the moment of the 30 seconds that would ignite millions of screens across the country. For the next few minutes, the hearing continued, but everyone knew the story had already been written. Staffers exchanged looks. Reporters whispered to each other. Even the chairman kept stealing glances toward Jasmine, his respect barely hidden. When the session finally adjourned, Gaetz gathered his papers hastily and stormed toward the exit. Reporters swarmed him with questions. Congressman Gaetz, do you have a response to Rep. Crockett's comments? But he waved them off, jaw clenched. Jasmine walked out moments later, calm and composed. The same reporters turned their microphones toward her. Representative Crockett, what do you say to those who think your comments were too personal? One asked. Jasmine smiled. I'd say that truth can feel personal when it hits close to home. Cameras flashed again. That quote, too, would soon go viral. As she exited the building into the crisp Washington air, Jasmine felt the weight of the moment settle in. She hadn't planned that exchange. She hadn't come for a fight. But when the fight arrived, she refused to shrink from it. She had faced louder men, tougher questions, and harsher headlines before, but today felt different. Today, she had said what millions of people were thinking, and she said it in the very place where silence too often wins. Somewhere behind her, Gaetz was still fuming, replaying the moment in his head, realizing too late that those 30 seconds of fire weren't just words, they were history in the making. And Jasmine Crockett had just owned it completely. The video of the exchange exploded online before the congressional hearing even wrapped up. Within an hour, #Crockett shuts Gaetz down and number 30 seconds of fire were trending across social media platforms. Clips of Jasmine's fiery remarks filled TikTok feeds, stitched with reactions from influencers, journalists, and everyday Americans who couldn't believe what they had just witnessed live on national television. One popular post summed it up. Matt Gaetz tried to silence Jasmine Crockett, and she burned him alive with facts, grace, and that last line. Iconic. Cable news shows replayed the confrontation on loop that evening, while pundits debated whether Jasmine had just cemented herself as one of the most commanding voices in Congress. Even international outlets picked it up. British anchors referred to her as the new firebrand of American politics. In Washington, the echo of that 30-second moment rippled through every hallway. At Gaetz's office, the atmosphere was tense. Aides huddled around a flat-screen TV, watching the clip for what felt like the 100th time. Every attempt to spin the story failed because the footage was undeniable. He tried to interrupt, and Jasmine had turned it into a statement that would outlive the hearing. One of his aides, barely out of college, spoke nervously. Congressman, Maybe we should release a clarification and say it was a misunderstanding about topic." Gaetz slammed his folder shut. No clarification, no apology. His tone was clipped, but his eyes betrayed something different, a frustration, even embarrassment. "We'll say she grandstanded, that's it." "But sir," another aide hesitated, "the clips everywhere, the comments." "I don't care about comments," Gaetz barked. "This is Washington, not social media." But even he knew that wasn't true anymore. In 2025, social media was Washington. Across the Capitol, Jasmine Crockett's office was buzzing in a completely different way. Phones rang non-stop, emails poured in, reporters begged for interviews. Her communications director looked at her, practically glowing with excitement. "Congresswoman, your speech hit 5 million views in 3 hours," she said, scrolling through analytics. "We've had outreach from CNN, MSNBC, even the BBC." Jasmine sat behind her desk, calm, fingers laced. "Let's stay focused," she said. "This isn't about me, it's about the issue." Her aide grinned. "Sure, but it doesn't hurt that everyone's calling it the A. Crockett clapback." Jasmine chuckled softly. "They always turn it into a headline." Then, with a pause, she added, "But if that headline makes people listen, maybe it's worth it." She wasn't wrong. Overnight, donations to her re-election campaign spiked. Grassroots supporters flooded her with messages of gratitude and pride. One woman wrote, "Thank you for showing my daughters that being interrupted doesn't mean backing down." Another said, "You spoke for every woman who's been told to calm down in a room full of loud men." By morning, Jasmine's team was already strategizing how to harness the attention for something meaningful. She decided to go on record not to gloat, but to clarify. On a morning news show, she appeared poised, wearing a simple navy suit, her voice even and calm. "Yesterday wasn't about clapping back," she said. "It was about standing up, not just for myself, but for every person who's tired of seeing these hearings turn into circus acts. We're here to govern, not perform." The host nodded, impressed. "You've certainly struck a chord with people. Some are calling you the new face of courage in Congress." Jasmine smiled politely. "Courage is doing your job when others are too busy grandstanding. That's all I did." Behind the scenes, however, Gaetz was fuming. He had lost control of the narrative, and that was the one thing he hated most. His allies tried to defend him online, claiming the clip was edited and out of context, but the full footage only made things worse. Every network played the uninterrupted version, and the optics were brutal. In private, even a few Republican colleagues whispered that Gaetz had walked straight into that one. One senator reportedly joked, "Matt should have stayed quiet." That woman roasted him like a Thanksgiving turkey. A week later, the fallout was still ongoing. Jasmine had been invited to speak at universities, women's leadership conferences, and even a youth civic summit. Her inbox overflowed with speaking requests, and her approval numbers in her district climbed. But she wasn't celebrating. In her office, one quiet evening, she sat alone, scrolling through messages from young women who had watched the exchange. One message in particular caught her attention, from a 17-year-old girl in Texas. "I watched you speak, and it made me feel like I could do anything. I'm applying to study political science now. I used to think politics wasn't a place for people like me." Jasmine felt her throat tighten. That message, more than the headlines or praise, made everything worth it. The next day, she stood before a room full of high school students, invited to talk about leadership and civic courage. She looked at the eager faces and said, "Let me tell you something, your voice is powerful. People will try to talk over you, interrupt you, dismiss you. Don't let them. If you believe in what you're saying, keep speaking. You might just change the conversation." The students applauded, some even standing. Cameras captured the moment. It wasn't about politics anymore, it was about inspiration. Meanwhile, Gaetz avoided any direct confrontation with Jasmine. At the next committee meeting, he entered quietly, head down, shuffling papers. The usual swagger was gone. Jasmine arrived minutes later, greeted by several members from both parties. The chairman nodded respectfully. When it was Gaetz's turn to speak, his voice was subdued. He kept his comments short, technical, and devoid of the theatrics he once thrived on. It was clear that the Crockett effect had left an impression. During a recess, One reporter cornered him in the hallway. "Congressman Gaetz, any comment on your last exchange with Rep. Crockett?" Gaetz gave a tight smile. "I think we've all moved on," he said curtly before walking away. But no one had really moved on. The internet hadn't, the public hadn't, and Jasmine certainly hadn't forgotten what that moment symbolized, a not personal victory, but a shift in tone. She had drawn a line, and people noticed. That night, back home in her district, Jasmine appeared at a town hall. She stood on stage, microphone in hand, speaking from the heart. "You know," she began, "sometimes the loudest thing you can do isn't shout, it's stand your ground. When someone tries to silence you, don't get smaller, get steadier, because this country doesn't move forward when we back down." Applause thundered through the hall. People rose to their feet, cheering, clapping, chanting her name. For once, politics felt less like a performance and more like a shared purpose. The headlines the next morning said it all. Jasmine Crockett turns viral moment into movement. She hadn't just shut Matt Gaetz down, she had elevated the conversation, proving that conviction could still outshine chaos in Washington. Weeks later, late one evening in her office, Jasmine received a text from a fellow congresswoman. "You gave a lot of us courage that day. Thank you." She smiled, setting her phone down. The Capitol dome outside her window glowed golden against the night sky. She knew there would be more hearings, more interruptions, more battles. But she also knew something had changed, not just for her, but for anyone who'd ever been told to stay quiet. Because sometimes, all it takes is 30 seconds of truth to echo for years. And Jasmine Crockett's 30 seconds had become her legacy.